Tonight, though, of course, we are here to celebrate Vanessa Veselka and her new novel, The Great Offshore Grounds. Publishers Weekly calls it a sprawling work of astonishing depth and scope. Veselka blends fascinating details of seamanship, cab driving, and boot camp with intimate, spot-on descriptions of contemporary American poverty, such as Cheyenne, who's one of the main characters, being shuttled to the couch to make room for Airbnb guests when she's late on rent and selling plasma. This gritty and unsentimental work is compassionate, funny, and deeply human. You can order the book from Booksmith. I'll drop a link in the chat here in just a moment. With Vanessa tonight in conversation is Emma Donoghue. Born in Dublin in 1969, Emma Donoghue is an Irish immigrant twice over. She spent 8 years in Cambridge doing a PhD in 18th century literature before moving to London, Ontario, where she lives with her partner and their 2 children. She also migrates between genres, writing literary history, biography, stage and radio plays, as well as fairy tales and short stories. She's best known for her novels, which range from the historical, Slammerkin, Life Mask, Landing, and The Sealed Letter, to the contemporary, Stir Fry, Hood, and Landing. Her international bestseller, Room, was a New York Times Best Book of 2010 and was a finalist for the Man Booker, Commonwealth, and Orange Prizes. For more information, visit emmadonoghue.com, and I will drop that link in the comments as well. Thank you, Emma, so much for being here tonight. Vanessa Veselka is the author of the novel Zazen, which won the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize. Her short stories have appeared in Tin House and ZYZZYVA, and her nonfiction in GQ, The Atlantic, Smithsonian, The Atavist, and was included in Best American Essays and the anthology Bitchfest, 10 Years of Cultural Criticism. She has been, at various times, a teenage runaway, a sex worker, a union organizer, an independent record label owner, a train hopper, a waitress, and a mother, and she lives in Portland, Oregon. Vanessa, thanks so much for being here, and congratulations on the book. Just a few house items before we get started. Obviously, you're all muted, but I encourage you to show the author's love in the chat. You can also ask any questions that you have throughout the program. We will have time for a Q&A at the end. We do have a one-strike policy in the chat, so please no hate speech or trolling. If I see any of that, we'll just remove you and you won't be able to get back in. So don't do that to yourself and don't do that to us. If you'd like to order any of the author's books, you can do that through Booksmith, and I'll drop that link in the chat shortly. So I think that's it from me. Without further ado, I'm very happy to turn it over to Vanessa and Emma. Thank you both so much for joining us, and Vanessa, congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much. And,
Evan, I think there's somebody in the waiting room.
Oh, you let him in, it looks like.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Vanessa. I think I saw you last in a restaurant in Portland, and
Yes.
before that at Powell's, and before that about 40 years before, where we were at school together when I was 9. It was like the most thrilling year of my life. This little Irish girl found herself in New York City for a year, and you just blasted into the classroom like this, you know, like a sun coming up, I have to say. So I'm glad you seem to have lost none of your personality.
No, it was that was a fun memory for, you know, you have written, I think, some about this too, or I know you've talked about it, that it was a big turning point year for you. New York at that time is 1980 in New York. This is like the hellfire years, right? And we're right on Christopher and Hudson in the West Village. And, you know, all of the kids there, you know, a lot of the teachers are gay, a lot of the environment is very gay. And it was just like, you know, it was pre-AIDS New York in the gay scene. It was a very different time and a very particular moment. And there were lots of roller skating and like really short shorts. And to be 9 and 10 in that environment was an interesting thing. But I think you came from a very rural place. You were the youngest of 8 kids, right?
Yeah, very much. No, I was from Dublin, but I think just all of Ireland seemed rural by comparison with New York, you know. And I remember some of our classmates saying to me like, oh, you speak English really well, you know. And, you know, it's funny, you've had such a bio, right? You've done so many things. I don't think just spending a year in a different city as a kid would have loomed that large on your bio, but on mine, you know, it was a very stimulating year. You know, coming from Ireland, I didn't even know divorced people. You know, everyone I knew looked more or less like me. So that year was a blast. we had a rather wonderful homeroom teacher, Arthur Alexander, who
Yes.
I didn't even know he was a children's author. And I wrote to him years later. I sent him my first novel, like I promised I would, you know, and we corresponded for a while. And I was just so thrilled to be able to say to him, yes, you know, all your teaching paid off, you know, because he was really part of that year. He had high expectations for us, you know.
Yes. Very high expectations. But there were 3 of us, and we all ended up writing novels in that class, you, me, and Nikki.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so how do you want to start this, Emma? Do you want to?
Why don't you tell us a bit about the Great Offshore Grounds, you know, where the title comes from, where the book came from, how long has it been brewing?
Okay, it took a long time. The title, The Great Offshore Grounds, is in the 1820s, there was a whale ship called the Essex, and it's actually what Moby Dick was loosely based on. Melville was obsessed with the wreck of the whale ship Essex. And basically, it comes into whaling at a time when we're starting to approach, not yet, but they're starting to approach what would have been peak oil. They've hunted whales to extinction. The right whale is nearly extinct on the eastern seaboard, and they're going farther and farther away, and they're going all the way down South America, and they're having to round the Horn. And so now every tall ship sailor who's getting on to be a whaler, you know, you get paid a percentage of the take of the ship. And that percentage is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The lay, they call it, is getting, and then at the same time, the trips are getting longer and longer and longer. So there comes to be this, it's not mythical, but it takes on the character of myth at that time, this breeding ground where, like, they haven't hunted them all to extinction, right? This breeding ground called the Great Offshore Grounds. And they know it's somewhere way out in the Pacific Ocean, you know, somewhere not, you know, somewhere between the Cook Islands and Peru, you know what I mean? Like, it's way, way out there. And this is the Essex was a ship that, you know, had just catastrophe after catastrophe and ends up getting out there and gets rammed, which is where they got the idea for Moby Dick, in the Great Offshore Grounds by a very sentient, pissed off whale. And the boat goes down and they end up having to do a 3,000-mile journey back. But this idea of, and they eat all their friends, which they deserved. But the idea of this, the Great Offshore Grounds, to me, I saw a lot of parallels between, you know, American capitalism and expansion and, you know, myths of national myths and who's on the ship and doing the work and the choices that are made to just sort of, like, as the lay is getting longer, what you do, and that whole sort of sense of approach to peak oil, and that way in America where we're always like, there's something new we'll discover that are going to get us out of this. There's something new that's going to happen. There's some other place, there's some other source. And so from the beginning, that idea was pretty early on, that idea was in my mind. Of the Great Offshore Grounds, I read a book called In the Heart of the Sea, which is great. The movie is a crime, but the book is great. And that affected, you know, just reading a lot of the primary accounts too was part of it. But that idea of the Great Offshore Grounds, that's where the title comes from. You know, it took 8 years to write, and it has a lot to do with work. It has a lot to do with jobs and work and what everybody does to get by. I think that most Americans, in my mind, are philosophers at heart. You know, you stop on a street corner and you ask them, I mean, it's true of the Irish as well, but like you stop on the street corner and you ask them, anybody, for like a few minutes, particularly people without money, and they will tell you within a few minutes, you know, their take on the world. It's like, so here's how I see it. And it usually is a tale of, like, you got the haves and the have-nots, and you got, you know what I mean? Like, it's all about your hustle on how you're going to get from point A to point B. So the characters in the novel have a lot of that, that need to live their lives and be free, but it's mediated by all the kind of shitty jobs or non-jobs or issues that they have to get through to get to where they want. So
I loved following the money, by the way, that the money is so specific in the book, you know, like the 2 daughters, they go see the dad, and the dad's so rich, and you think, oh yes, he's going to give them money. And then he's like, no, I'm not going to spoil your lives by giving you money. You know? And all the way through the book, you're so aware of how much each of them has and what can they afford it and what can they spend it on and what decisions are they making, you know? it was such a lovely kind of tight thread, you know, like the kind of, you know, strategizing of poverty, not poverty as some fixed condition, but as a kind of series of choices and brainstormings and you know, forks in the road.
Yeah, a lot of times I think when people talk about poverty, they talk about it in terms of like a very particular sort of how the other half lives narrative, you know, a kind of like, here's the squalor and these people are saints and they live in, and they're immigrants, you know, like this need to sort of like gild the lily on it. And like what you lose is the actual humanity. You lose the humor and the resourcefulness, the incredible resourcefulness of how people move through what they do, you know. And then the other version is, you know, that it's just simplified. And I think that what money does more than anything is, you know, if you're not starving, what money does more than anything is make things complex. I don't mean having money makes it simple. Not having money makes it complex. The simplest thing you have to do, suddenly there's 10 more steps than if you didn't have to do it. And so it just continues to stack. And that's what happens with a lot of these characters is they just make decisions based on, you know, how they're stacking things. And it leads to different parts. So work has a lot to do with it. Money has a lot to do with it. Yeah.
I remember reading Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dime, and she talks about these elaborate childcare and transport arrangements that, you know, some of the women she was talking to, you know, they'd have 2 different shitty jobs as you know, say waitresses, and to get to both of them, they'd have to leave their kids with a cousin and then to pay the cousin to mine. And there was almost no money left after they paid for gas. And, you know, these were technically bad decisions, but actually they were the only possible decisions for them that day. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was the conversation I had with, you know, some nursing home workers last week, right? Like, this is the reality for women in particular, but, you know, it's the reality. Anyway, on that cheery note.
Well, you know, these are discussions a lot of us are having this year because COVID has acted like this weird kind of spotlight that has shown up things like, you know, I never knew that you know, healthcare workers sometimes work in 3 different long-term care homes in order to make ends meet. So, I mean, there's a reason that they're going from institution to institution and that there's a consequent transmission risk. You know, there are a lot of people who cannot stay home. There are a lot of people who get called essential workers and then paid dirt, you know.
And they don't get a lot of, in the States, you know, the, you know, not to get super nerdy about this, but basically the 80 hours of extra sick time that everybody else who was sort of in a certain tier got was denied healthcare workers, because they were considered to be too essential. So it was this idea that like, oh, if they have the leave, then they'll just go and they won't work and we need them to work. And it's like, so your way of getting them to work is not to give them hazard pay. Your way of getting them to work is actually make sure that they don't have enough sick time to take it when they need it. That's your way of making it. It was just like, so it's, yeah. Could talk all night on that.
So there's so many different jobs and forms of work in the novel. I think that the scenes on board ship were the ones that fascinated me the most, actually. I'm assuming you must have some personal experience of this. I just don't think you'd get it only out of books.
No, limited. I'm not to overstate my abilities as a tall ship sailor. I'm not a tall ship sailor. I did spend a month working on a tall ship. In a, you know, what was a sail trainee program, but some of that is just sort of like, sign here, that way the Jones Act doesn't apply to you. You know what I mean? Like, and, you know, there's this great tradition of going to sea, you know, which I think my actual experience of being able to get on the ship I got on mirrored perfectly, which is, you know, I had to bribe the doctor to sign me off because I didn't have time to get down to get his signature. So I like bribed the admin to bribe with chocolate, with stories of the high sea. I mean, I used everything to like get them to just say I'm healthy. I'm healthy. Trust me, I'm healthy. Just say I'm healthy and send the facts, you know, because I applied to go do this thing after the deadline with none of the money and yeah, and none of the doctor's records. So I had 2 days to get together everything that wasn't get togetherable. And it was mostly just, you know, bullshitting to get it there. So I did. And I felt like that was very in keeping with the way that a lot of people go into those experiences traditionally. But they sent me a waiver of all the things I had to sign away, you know, and it was like, you can die And then it was like, and here are the ways you can die. They like really went over it again and again. It's like, you could fall off the rigging here. You could break a femur. We're like, you know, we do not have a ship surgeon. We are 2 days out for port, you know, so it was like to sign all those things. And that's why I was saying with the Jones Act, this ill trainee allows, you're not a customer, you're a trainee. You're not a worker, you're a trainee. I met amazing people who really did know how to do this work. And I was a slow learner, and I worked hard and was still a slow learner. There's like 198 lines, you know, belayed to deck on the, you know, ship I was on.
Wow.
Which was a brig, and it was 14 sails, you know, 14 sheets, and like it was a lot, you know, and we were under crewed at the time for a variety of reasons. I got to be in a very big battle reenactment of the Battle of Lake Erie, which was wild. You know, I know a lot more about weather gauge and nautical battles now than I ever did. So it was a good experience, but really as a writer, the research aspects of it are more just 90% of that I throw out. What it allows me to do is write a physical space. So if my character's standing here, I know what she's got right in front of her. You know, I know what it feels like to go aloft for the first time and be 118 or 100, you know, however far up. I know what it feels like to be below decks, and you know, the ship I used is somewhat modeled on the Niagara, which has a very, very shallow draft. And so it's kind of like a metronome. It's very top heavy. And, you know, that's just because they aren't thinking about people. It's like 5'2" is the clearance. They aren't thinking about people. It's like, fuck the sailors. Who cares about the sailors? You know, they're dirt. Pack them in, right? Like, they're not thinking about people. They're thinking this is where the guns should sit in the water line. So it's all just sort of not about the sailors. But the Niagara was a great ship and great folks and very skilled, and nothing like the ratty carny fest that is in the novel. So,
you know, I do find it's hard to make up a setting. You know, I can research a lot of things in my books, but I don't think I've ever set a book in an entirely, you know, unfamiliar, say, country, you know, because there's a limit to how much, you can find a lot of things in books or other forms of research, but the actual feel of a place. And I often don't go there right at the start. Like when I set a novel in 19th century San Francisco, I mean, I had been to San Francisco before, but I didn't go there specifically to research it until I had one draft written. And then I went and just tried to get a feeling for the landscape, because of course, so many other things would have changed. Chinatown looked different from it, the way it had before the fire and the earthquake. Right. But the hills would be the same, you know, the sort of intimate relationship between the land and the sea and all that. So yeah, I can quite see how you know, it would be just about impossible to set scenes on a ship unless you had some experience of it. Were there parts of the book where you found it much harder to conjure up what the experience might have been like? I mean, what about, say, you know, I don't think you've ever had any military experience.
No, you know, and I think what it is, I'm going to spend a lot of time with some Marines at a recruitment station, and you know, they were bored as hell, and I was like, I'm going to hang out with you for a day, you know, and get them talking. And that was, you know, learned a lot. It was very interesting just listening. And what I was listening for was different than what they were telling me. I was listening for language. I was listening for details. You know, I was listening for how they explained their world to each other. I wasn't listening as much for like, well, these are the paper, you know, I mean, although I did walk through the processes and things that I did need to know. And I enjoyed that time. Mostly the book, everywhere I am in the book, I've been close to it or I've been in it. I don't write setting, but there are a couple of places that was not true. And I had a very good friend who had been sending me pictures for years, who I like, you know, in Alaska, I haven't been everywhere in Alaska that the book takes place, you know. So, but I had a friend who did that work in those places that I was able to like run things by and say, okay, like I'm thinking of this, is this only Southeast, or is this something that feels culturally true to this other place? So there was some of that.
The book is so mobile. I mean, we were talking about, you know, how we dislike presentations of poverty as like a fixed thing. Here is a poor community and I'm going to describe it. These people are constantly in transit and making decisions as they go along, so it's never static. And did you know where they were going to go? How much of a planner and how much of a pantser are you?
No. I'm not a planner at all. I believe in like writing my way into a corner, like as kind of my strategy is I just try to like cutoff paths. You know, a book is all potential closing to zero, right? Like that's actually what happens. It's just like everything is potential until you start writing, and then it starts going like this until it's zero. You've killed all potential, the book is done. Like that is the process that is happening, right? So as you cut off every path, you're cutting off possibilities. And so, you know, if I'm cutting off things by instinct without thinking I might need that later, you know, then for me that the stakes as a writer for me go up. And so my desperation and need to figure it out, like, so I do a big kind of like trust, like I'm just going to trust, like at the farthest, you know, but the deepest I can get into the book before, you know, where I'm like, well, I've narrowed it down to almost no possibility that this thing can be finished. The success, you know what I mean? And then I still have to figure it out. So I like that process.
Do you ever find you have to backtrack? You know, do you send them to Alaska and then go, actually, I need them to be in Boston?
No, I'm too stubborn for that. I think that I should do that. I think what I do instead is go like, no, I'm going to make Alaska work. Like, I mean, I think that that's very much my orientation when I write. So I'd be better off to, but should I read a couple things or?
Yeah. Sorry, just getting so caught up in the chat. Yes.
We can keep chatting.
Give us a sample. Which bit are you going to read from?
This is an experiment because the book's just come out and I'm experimenting with which parts to read from. I'm going to just say a few things about the beginning, and then I think I'm going to just do, because we're talking about work, I think I'll do a couple of different characters. But so the basic idea of the story is there's two sisters, they're half sisters, Cheyenne and Livy, and their mother is this woman, Kirsten, who is, you know, she's, you know, an anti-capitalist witch, you know, kind of very opinionated figure. And she has raised the daughters by herself. And there is a sort of family myth they were raised on, which was that, actually, I'll just read that one paragraph. No, I'll just read, okay, I know what I'll do. So I'm gonna start and just jump around. We'll see how this goes. If it's a train wreck, I won't do it next time. So, okay. Across the Sound in Seattle, Livy looked out the window of her basement apartment. Her father was getting married that afternoon, and though it was already late April, a cold, wet breeze still whistled through the gaps in the cloaking, turning her skin to goose flesh. A few feet away stood her sister Cheyenne, poorly slept but already dressed. I'm freezing, said Cheyenne. I'm turning on the space heater. Turn on the oven, said Livy. They charge us for electricity. Cheyenne rolled her eyes but went over to the white gas stove. Cranking the temperature to broil, she leaned back against the oven door so she could feel the heat on her hamstrings as the oven warmed. Yesterday, they'd spent the whole day picking rocks out of Livy's landlord's garden in trade for a patch of soil near the sunny side of the fence so that Livy could grow food. It wasn't political. Livy didn't care about pesticides or permaculture. She was just the cheapest person that Cheyenne had ever known. She lived off past-date groceries. She washed her clothes once a month with a teaspoon of dish soap in a tub. She made her own bras. Cheyenne was pretty sure she would have rinsed and reused dental dams if she thought it would work. Recently, Livy had become convinced that she could feed herself off 3 square yards of land. It was ridiculous, but since Cheyenne had appeared out of nowhere and moved in on her without warning or rent, she didn't have much of a say. Taller and unfreckled, Cheyenne had chosen a rose-colored cap-sleeve shirt with eyelets and a pair of black pinstripe suit pants. She could pass in the crowd they'd be in today. Her secondhand clothes came off as vintage, while her misadventures in body art made her seem a fine vase, badly cracked and chipping, but a gritty accent to any room. Cyril didn't come to my wedding, said Cheyenne. Why should I go to his? Did you invite him? Hell no. He would have arrived like a lord and expected to walk me down the aisle. Here, let me give you away. Oh, hey, Dad, I think you already did that. Yeah, you're right. He would have, said Livy. So why are we even going? I have a day off work. It's cheaper than a movie. I'm tired of ramen and hot dogs, and there'll be rich people food, so I'm taking Tupperware. Please don't make it obvious, said Cheyenne. We're already going to look so out of place. Why? Because you have jailhouse tats of hearts and clubs on your knuckles, or because I don't shave and look like a landscaper? Cheyenne spread the fingers of her left hand. Not just hearts and clubs, she said. The one on my thumb is a diamond, and the pinky is a spade. You just can't tell anymore. Livy crossed to where she'd laid out her newly washed blue painter's pants and pulled them on over her long johns. I'm going to the wedding because it's a show of support that costs me nothing. I've never thought of him as a dad, so I don't care. At his worst, he's just a big blank, a disappointment. He gets a clean slate. That's my wedding gift to him, a pass. It's the only decent move. I shot my better angels, said Cheyenne. They're angels, you can't kill them. If they were real, you could. Livy could feel Cheyenne's eyes burning holes in her ribs. She zipped her fly and flattened her pockets. I have clothes if you want to try and borrow something, said Cheyenne. Livy froze for a second, then bent down to roll the cuffs, making sure they were perfectly even on both sides and all the way around. I have a white shirt. It has buttons. I can tuck it in, she said. What do you think the bride will be like? Asked Cheyenne. A full-blown voodoo narcissist like him, probably. Oh no, he couldn't take the competition. I'm betting Anglo Geisha. Oh yeah, I can see that. Well, we should at least get drunk before we go. I'd rather do it on his dime, said Livy. I'll bet inviting us isn't even his idea. I'll bet it's the bride's. Livy smiled. Maybe he has cancer. And his doctors warned him the guilt suppresses the immune system. Cheyenne propelled herself off the stove with her back foot. Yes, she said. No. She held up her hand. Wait, I have it. He found God, and God said unto him, Cheyenne threw her arms wide and boomed, stop being such a dick! A dick, a dick, a dick. Echo, echo, echo. Neither sister had seen their father since they were 14. The wedding invitation had arrived only 2 weeks before the date of the ceremony, just on the heels of Cheyenne's reappearance, something their mother Kirsten considered prophetic. It was obvious from the short window that the decision to include them was, at best, the result of a debate, or at worst, an afterthought. Their initial instinct had been to ignore it, and the invitation was repurposed as a coaster before it was seriously considered. But in the end, they could not ignore it. It tapped at a hidden door. Shh. He is a king in a castle. He is only stashed as the way in the village to keep us safe. Someday he will call for us and claim us and make everything all right. I'm gonna move to a couple other parts. So those are the two sisters, and I've decided I'm experimenting with just reading a couple sections. As girls, they've been fed the fairy tale. Two women loved the same man. One wanted a baby, and the other wanted to chase the North Star. Each became pregnant, so they made a plan. The one that wanted the baby would take them both, and the one who wanted the North Star would continue on. The first mother was happy, and the second mother was happy. But which daughter is which? It drove Livy and Cheyenne fucking batshit crazy. Kirsten had never given them the name or a way to reach the other woman. She had refused to say which girl belonged to which mother, and Livy and Cheyenne had never been able to figure it out. Each sister had Kirsten's black hair and her mannerisms, her broad shoulders, but so did a lot of people. Mostly they looked like their father Cyril, who also had black hair. Paperwork didn't clarify anything either. Theirs was a home birth, and Kirsten was listed as the mother on both birth certificates. When they finally got the real story, it didn't help because it wasn't much different than the fairy tale version. Kirsten met Cyril when he was in grad school. They had an open relationship. Cyril fell in love with a girl who was new to town. The girl and Kirsten became friends. Not long after, both women got pregnant. Since one was ready for a baby and one was not, they struck a deal over a bottle of wine and some tosses of the I Ching. One woman became the mother of two girls and the other became a Buddhist nun. Cyril, not as much of a polyamorous adventurer as he originally thought, did not stick around, and Kirsten raised the girls alone. So the last two quicker sections I want to read, maybe they're about the same, we'll see, is I wanted to read a section of one on cab driving, and then one small section on the mother, just so you get a sense of the different jobs and the different, since we're talking about money. So this is Crown Victoria. This is the brother, Essex. Essex didn't have a steady lease. If he wanted to drive, he had to go down and ask for a cab and put his name on a list, hang out in the tunnel for hours and wait for the dispatchers to call out a number for the cab he could take. There were rules, though. You couldn't leave and come back, even if you were at the bottom of the list. The roster was there because it wasn't a first come, first served kind of thing. The list was just so they didn't forget you existed. They went down to it according to their own logic, the dispatchers. Let's see, yeah, he's good, give him 112. Oh, he's got a sick kid, give him 38. Oh, no fucking way he wrecked last week. No. Oh, not him either. He got caught stacking. Oh, no. Oh, definitely, man. She's cute. Give her 26. Oh, her? She's totally cute. Give her 122. And God, brother, are you kidding me? Hot. 88. Luck or lightning could strike. Sometimes you got a free lease because the dispatchers didn't like the owner of your cab and comped it on a technicality. And sometimes you got charged for a fee that didn't exist or had to wait for hours on a cab that wasn't coming because they were curious to see how you'd react. Once Essex spent a whole week driving around with a roasted chicken under his seat because the dispatch guys had a bet to see how long would take for the pre-cooked bird to rot to the point where you could smell it. Sometimes Essex would slip into the dispatcher's office and listen to them tell stories. It was his favorite part of driving, watching the steady drivers pass through, the smooth-shaven Eritreans in pressed shirts and lemon cologne, the Caribbeans with thin gold chains and silver teeth, the middle-aged Persians with low voices and rich accents. Far from being a sacred sphere of enlightened multiculturalism, though, the dispatcher's office was the epicenter of unchecked stereotyping. Don't you people pray like 5 times a day? Where's your rug? Man, I don't know. I must have left it at the synagogue. Hey, amigo, como esta? I'm fucking Egyptian, you idiot. It was the kind of gloves-off diversity found the world over in places where people of different backgrounds actually live together. And the last part, I know I'm jumping around, but I wanted to just give a sense of the different characters in the different jobs. Actually, maybe I'll just do this. History also plays a role in this book quite a bit. So this will be the last section I read. And place. A few hours past Missoula. This is when the sisters are on a trip. A few hours past Missoula. The land changed again, flattening and turning brown, scoured by wind. They crossed the Yellowstone River. Then it followed it as it ran north by northeast, fed by the Yellowstone Lake. It had poured over the falls and through the Black Canyon before they ever knew it. Past Billings, the Yellowstone had joined the Bighorn, which carried with it the Little Bighorn and the Tongue. As they drove, they saw signs for reenactments. Custer, stand with or stand against, your choice. And they heard talk in a rest area of a magnificent new state-of-the-art jail created from nothing but investor money and high-interest loans. Then they came to the Great Powder River, which was fed by the Little Powder, as well as oil from pipeline breaks, Red Cloud's War, and benzene as it joined the Yellowstone. The Yellowstone, which had already inherited so much, the Bighorn and the wind and the Tongue as it flowed towards the Missouri River, which had no choice but to inherit the watershed as it drained towards the Mississippi, that unstoppable force. And maybe there is just no way out of history. No matter how much you want to come from a different story, you can't. They traveled from high elevations and scrubland to prairie and chain stores and settled in the doldrums of flat grass, sunburned and feral, another unwelcome thing upon the land. After Miles City, they dropped south through the hunting grounds of the Crow people. In the periphery, Libby saw a new future, free again. Cheyenne saw a woman with a changing face, now this, now that. The mother narcotic. Maybe a different past would mean a different future. Maybe there was another history to claim. Passing through the Black Hills north of Mount Rushmore and Pine Ridge, south of the Bakken Formation and Standing Rock, they drove the Badlands. East of the coal beds, west of the Black Hills, they passed a rash of square and Sputnik-era buildings, each half as tall as the flagpoles in front of them. An elementary school, a middle school, a high school, decorated with signs leading to bomb shelters, furnished with government-issued desks made of moonshots and school bells cocked like guns for lunch periods and air raids. They passed the white, chalky pits of bentonite clay terraformed by bulldozers, missing only the great hand of a giant 3-year-old descending from the heavens. There were ripples of land. The sun was a patina on the highway. Tangled spaghetti creeks glinted and irrigated farms lined one beside another in the jade mahjong tiles. Livy looked through the windshield as she drove the grassland steppe on either side of the road. They could hear the subsonic songs of red rock and scrub brush. In an unsparing white flash of midday light, they drove through the miles of the cash crop ethanol, a pentimento of buffalo skins behind it, untanned and rotting in piles on the prairie. They, too, were shadows. Drive to the sea here, drive to the sea there, raise a great army, Nantucket to the Arctic to Panama, growing in all directions like a deep breath. They drove across the great American desert. An empty, lifeless wasteland, it stretched from the Midwest to the Rockies and served as an initiation for pioneers and speculators seeking the spoils of the West. Only the desert was not lifeless, and it was not empty. It was not the Kalahari or the Gobi, but a prairie overrun with life, a prairie covering a great aquifer from which grain and future dust bowls and the Monroe Doctrine would be drawn. Wagons brought whale oil to new towns, oil for light and lubrication, bones for corsets and collar stays, ivory for the keys of Midwest parlor pianos. Girls stretched out their hands wide over the white keys, dreaming of marriage, future typists, future salaried masses, secretaries, tapping out notes, imagining still a world made of whale teeth and rib cages and brown fat and ambergris. Was this where it had all gone wrong? Livy saw a man standing on the arid expanse, flickering in and out of existence, preening an Elizabethan ruff with a fistful of charters. He bent down to check the soil for tobacco. Finding it too dry to plant, he strode forth, oscillating over the steppe, to the gold and salt and light rumored to be in the hills to the west. She watched him vanish into a pinprick in the rearview mirror, a small white star degenerating towards collapse. That may not have worked, but I wanted to give more of a taste of the different elements of the books and
yeah,
jobs.
and you know, that's probably the best way to represent a novel like this, because any one section is not going to represent the you know, the kind of mosaic of it. Oh, I so enjoyed in particular tonight the taxi driving bit. You know, I think because I have so little experience of any work, you know, like I was a chambermaid briefly at 17 and I got fired for poor bathroom standards. Since then, all I've done is read and write. So I get an absolute fascination from passages which talk about the nitty gritties that, you know, the customers would never see. Say in Lily King's new novel, Writers and Lovers, there's a whole section about being a waitress and, you know, which table you get based on whether the manager wants to be nice to you that night. And, you know, it's just that, you know, we've all been in restaurants, but you just don't see the power relations going on behind the scenes, you know. Fascinating. Especially the roast chicken. That piece just pushes
That was
it
true.
to the edge into surreal.
That was true. I drove night cab for about a year in Portland, and that didn't happen to me. I saw it happen, but yeah.
You smelled it.
Yeah, we had the cab one night, and I was like, what? You know, so, should we look at questions? I can't tell if there are a lot or how far we're into it. I could talk to you forever, so I don't want to like dominate everything.
Sure. Evan, do you want to give us some questions? What do you think?
Yeah, hi, Vanessa, that was wonderful. Thank you for that reading. I do have a question for you. It comes from Jen. Jen says, the book was so moving, the striving and hustle, the open road for something better. Do any of these characters find happiness in your mind after the book ends? All these characters seem like works in progress. I can imagine their stories continuing.
Yeah, I believe in these characters. You know, I do. I really do. I believe that they find continuous movement that's alive. That's the best way I could put it. I'm definitely not going to continue them like in a kind of next writing project. But I do think of them running around out in the world. And that's in fact why I was able to finish the book, because it was very hard for me to finish it and write. And I went through a lot of different stages around it. And I went through points of depression and just all sorts of things. And really emotionally, deeply, like so many of us, battered by what the last 10 years has looked like in this country, you know, with just like the right, you know, just like shooting after shooting, even like it just like feels like an assault all the time. And I just felt like every time I would sort of get a momentum and go like, art does matter, I can be writing, it's something would happen, I would go like, no, this is totally unimportant. How am I supposed to find meaning in this? Why should I be writing this now? Like it just was constantly being thrown out that way. And I think also because I'm an organizer, like the part of me was like, I should go back and be doing that. That's more important. But I do think the books ended up containing those things, but it made it a slow process. And the one thing that completely kept me going is that I really love these characters. They're real to me. You know, it's one of the great dilemmas of writing fiction. I don't know if this is true for you, Emma, but you know, every novelist I know, you know, have the potential that like you look down every 3 or 4 years, or in my case, in this one, 8 years, and you realize like all your best friends are imaginary. Like those are the relationships you've tended the most. They're the people you spent the most time with. Like they don't exist. But I would have this moment again and again where like I can't do this book and I need to quit and just cut my losses and go do something else. Where I would say, but if I don't, nobody gets to know these characters, and maybe nobody cares. But I do, you know, I care that Essex is in the world. I care that Livy and Cheyenne are in the world. And so Kirsten. So, you know, that wasn't a great assumption that other people were going to be missing them. It was more that I didn't, you know, I wanted them to be there.
It's funny what we feel we owe to our characters. You know, there's this sense of obligation. I mean, sometimes when I've written about real historical people, I have a very direct feeling of like, this is their only chance. They're like knocking on the coffin going, right, you know, speak for me. But even if they're invented ones, I feel I owe them a lot. But the paradox is, even though I love my characters, I'm notoriously cruel to them, right? In that I literally confine them or emotionally confine them at other times. You know, I can't do epic sweep. You know, I typically, you know, like my new one, The Pull of the Stars, is 3 days in a Dublin hospital in 1918. Pretty much always in one maternity flu ward, which is a converted cupboard, really. So, you know, I jam these people together, and it just seems to me to turn up the heat, to speed up the chemical reactions between them. I love the way if you create very strong unities of time, space, and action, then every tiny little exchange between these people starts to matter. They get to know each other so fast, for instance. I was also an experiment, like if I take just 3 days, but if they're intense enough in the middle of a pandemic, can these people change each other's lives really, really quickly? You know, like how much can it work? And sometimes I think my readers feel that I'm being cruel to a character, especially if I kill them off, as it were. But to me, it's not about whether the character happens to die within the time frame of the novel. It's more like, do I give them enough moments in the light? Do I give them enough good lines? You know, so I think if I'm truly cruel to a character, it's that I don't give them enough attention. But if I let them blaze on the page, then it's as if they're alive every time the book is open. So I don't really feel I've ever killed them off. You know, it's like how much good page time you give them.
This is why you're also a playwright, right? Like that's very much the way, you know, and I think that's what's so strong about your work and so strong about the, you know, there's nothing more claustrophobic than a play, you know, in a lot of ways, you know.
It's true. And, you know, dialogue is the form of writing I like best.
Me too.
If for some reason somebody pointed a gun at my head and said, like, just write in one mode, it would be all dialogue all the time. Yeah.
I start every project I do, every fiction thing I do, I start by free writing dialogue. Because
really?
Once the second you just say something random, I just sort of like let something come out, and a voice answers. It's usually an argumentative voice, because I have a kind of, you know, that's how my head works.
Hey, but also we need conflict, you know.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, so if you say, so like with Zazen, the first thing I wrote was, "Can you sit still on fire?" It was just a free write. I just was thinking about, can you sit still on fire? And in the response that came right back was like, no, you can't, it's biological. Like, and it was just, and it still stayed in the front of Zazen. Like, so I free write because you start to know who the characters are by what they don't agree with and what their relationship is. And so like, I don't have any idea who they are, and it sort of comes out of that. Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm a huge planner, actually. I see my books as kind of like, it's like architecture or something. It's not going to stand up unless I've planned it well. But the exception is that once I let my characters start talking, things change. They might not change that radically, but they change subtly, because even if I find I write best if I know in advance what the point of the scene is. Why are these people gathered together? It's not just desultory conversation like this. There's some important reason for me to show this scene. But then as they start to talk, the weight can lie somewhere else than what I planned. So I once, in one of my novels, I had two characters who I just meant to be co-workers, really. There were two servants in a household, and they started fancying each other, and I was like, where did this come from, you know? So I let them have a brief doomed affair. So yeah, you know, no matter how much planning you can do, there's still an unpredictable chemistry in how people
the rabbits still run off.
Yeah. And that's so
Let me ask you
enjoyable.
something about the Pull of the Stars, because for those, I don't know how many on this will know, but Emma has a new book out, and it happens to be a book that is all about, it takes place during the 1918 flu pandemic. And, you know, you had finished, if I have this correctly, you had finished the draft only in March 2020 before, like she'd been working on it for years, and the draft when, you know, the final draft when it or whatever, really literally as COVID hit and they bumped up your publishing date.
I know, which is weird because most writers this year have
Everybody else in COVID got bumped off.
Yeah.
You got bumped up by a year, right? Like how far did they bump your date up?
Yeah, it was going to be published next spring because they said to me, oh, let's avoid the whole US election autumn, you know. Oh, don't be publishing fiction during an election. I have published fiction twice in America during an election and no one can pay any attention. They're just all distracted and nervous and they keep saying things like, we'll move to Canada, we'll move to Canada. And then they don't, you know. So I don't believe it anymore.
It's funny that you mentioned that because that's how this book is coming out now, because everybody was trying to stay away from fall 2020.
Yeah.
Everybody, it's like the plague.
Because what, there are 600 books coming out on the 4th of September. It's horrifying.
Yeah, well, it's also it's the big season for it. And then it's also like everything else for fiction and for literary fiction, they're like everybody's like trying to like bail off, you know? And my editor, who's a wonderful person, and the assistant editor, or the person who's working with him, she's assistant editor now, she's over at Vintage. We were talking about it and we're like, you know, we're bold. Like, why don't we just put it right dead center of the election season? Like, we were just like, let's just go for it, right? So we were like, okay, we'll do that. Why not, you know? So we were looking at something in early September, like in fall. We planned for fall 2020. And then it turned out when that nobody was there. It was like an open field practically compared to, and that's the thing, is you can't plan those things. And it's, you know, America in the last, you know, years, it's not like it's winding back down. Like, these are huge issues. They're going to be ongoing. They're going to take a lot of fight. They're going to take a lot of organizing. They're going to take a lot of real rough choices. And if books can't survive that, then, I mean, it's hard. But yours got pushed up because of it. And
I know, I felt distinctly sheepish because, as you say, I started my book in 2018 because it was the centenary of the pandemic. So I wasn't thinking of any contemporary relevance. But of course, even if you write historical fiction, you're always putting your ideas of today into it. So of course I was bringing out all sorts of aspects of it that only a modern reader would think of. And then, yeah, I sold it last year and I delivered it. And then I thought, okay, phew, you know, I've got a year before publication. And then I realized that COVID was happening, and I only then thought, oh, I guess there's a bit of a connection. So my publishers wanted it to be published this summer, and I felt distinctly sheepish, like I was profiting from a pandemic, you know. But then I thought it just makes more sense to talk about these things now. By next year, people will be thoroughly sick of any pandemic stories, you know. Yeah. So I quite like the chance to be focused on healthcare workers, actually, because my book is basically about a nurse and a doctor and a hospital volunteer. So I'm looking at the kind of web of healthcare, and I think healthcare workers have been on all our minds this year. I mean, we've suddenly started really noticing them, actually thinking about the risks they run and the uncertainties they face. And, you know, the stories we've heard of health workers, say, moving out from their family, living in a caravan or something in order not to bring the virus home.
Oh, yeah. I was working with a woman at the union who a couple months ago, you know, where she basically had to put her kid, you know, somewhere else, her 7-year-old, and not see her, hug her, touch her for, you know, 2.5 months. And yeah, that's the reality life of somebody's making $12 an hour, saving somebody's bacon, you know, so to speak, and not, you know, making homemade PPE to go do their job.
Oh, so, yeah, like dressing themselves in garbage bags. Yeah.
Yep. And they were in garbage bags before COVID, because this is an industry that takes people's money. I mean, like, okay, I got to stop talking about it because I can talk about this forever. I actually have a small piece coming out about what I think of the nursing home industry using real estate money to get rich off of, coming out in a couple weeks for Labor Day. So.
Where's it coming out?
It'll be in Daily Beast.
Brilliant.
Yes.
It's funny, even though I was doing the copy edit on The Pull of the Stars in April, but I didn't add anything because already there were such similarities between the pandemics. For instance, I've got government posters quoted at intervals through the book, and these have the kind of, you know, creepily, vaguely reassuring tone that politicians use, you know, like, the government has the situation well in hand, do not panic, you know, do not be defeatist. And, you know, in particular, the British government in this year, you know, when Boris Johnson would come out with some line like, our new slogan is stay alert. You know, that's just so vague and meaningless, and yet it subtly implies that it's your own fault if you catch this completely invisible virus, you know?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, and it's like we're both have written about, I mean, like, in some way, this novel also has to do with healthcare, even though it's not as centered, because there's a character with the mother who's making all these choices based on trying to get on healthcare, you know, as well. And so it's just like, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's just poverty or whether it's just, you know, it's an ongoing thing. I don't know if we're like taking up all the time talking about healthcare. I'm fine to keep talking about healthcare. I'm also fine to answer questions. What do you guys want to do? Speak, group.
This has been great. I do have another question, which is, what does it mean for a woman who does not want to be a mother? That this was a powerful thread.
Say this again?
Oh yeah, what does it mean for a woman who does not want to be a mother in the context of the Great Offshore Grounds?
Oh, well, you know, so there's two mothers, you know, in the book. There is, I mean, it's kind of a reduction, but two mother figures in the book. And I would actually argue that neither want to be mothers in some way. I mean, I think the thing that to me was very interesting about Kirsten's character, as opposed to a character that comes in later, Anne Radar Justine, is that not because she's noble, but Kirsten she's a teenager when she gets pregnant. And she just has a kind of vague idea that she can't imagine. She's recently become vegetarian and can't imagine like having an abortion. Like, she just has this very vague sort of sentiment of like, and she's newly sort of in this awakening about, you know, being pagan and this and that. And she just sort of runs by instinct. And she's just like, I'm going to have kids. How hard, you know, it'll be fine. Right. And then she realizes she has these, you know, there are these two little girls, and she realizes that she doesn't actually, and this isn't something I specifically hold this, it's very subtly in the book. It's really at a section that comes later, but like, she just can't find a way out that they don't pay the price for. And so there's this kind of drive to her character where I think, you know, she's not an earth mother. She's not a kind of, you know, perfectly nurturing character. She's somebody who's making choices. And the choices that she's making, the one choice she has made has led her to this other choice, where she doesn't have a choice about being a mother, really, unless she's just going to pick up and go, you know. But I would not say it's that she really wanted to be one, whereas the other woman definitely knows she doesn't want to be one, and has a different relationship to that. I think that neither Cheyenne nor Livy want to be mothers. I cannot even imagine either of them being mothers in the book. So I think that I think the book has a lot of women who, you know, Margaret. So maybe nobody wants to be a mother in the book. You know, when I really get down to it, I don't know that I could say that completely, but there is this real question with different characters. I don't know if there's a follow-up that makes it make more sense. I can't, it's hard for me to read the chat while it's happening. So if I missed something.
You know, while you're reading it, in my book, there's such compulsory motherhood because it's Ireland in 1918. And, you know, Ireland has only recently stopped being a country of remorseless pronatalism. I mean, my mother had 8, for instance. My grandfather was one of 21. So, you know, in the first draft, I didn't specify when. I thought it was clear enough that it was around 1918. But I deliberately left out all those markers, and I didn't say which war was on. And my agent read it, and she actually thought this was dystopia set in a fictional country where sinister nuns are making women pump out lots of babies. And I'm like, no, that's just Ireland, you know. But I did want to bring some of that slightly weird, you know, dystopian post-apocalyptic vibe to historical fiction, because you know the past is strange country, and if you can bring some of that strangeness into focus rather than letting the past seem kind of cozily familiar, you know,
right,
then why not?
So I think I've caught up a little bit on this thread. Male readers, can I say something? I want to answer this question because it seems like it's part of it, because, and I'm curious about if this has been something for you too, Emma. I'm going to be really honest and say things that are like, that I'm not comfortable with in this. So Zazen, my first book, and also a lot of my nonfiction has always had a good high number of male readers, right? It's always been probably at least half male readers. And in writing this book, I realized that I was doing something in the writing of it that I had to stop. And I didn't realize, I mean, it was just one of those, which was, I realized I was holding back from certain kinds of ways of telling a story because I perceived them as feminized to a certain way. And I was afraid of losing my, intellectual cred, which is a male mystique, right? Like there's a kind of, and a lot of press, the press I'd had before at different times, I would always get sort of put aside from women writers. Like I wasn't in, like for instance, with nonfiction, there would be many pieces that would say like the very true, very fucked up assessment that, you know, when men write about their personal like thoughts and lives, it's personal essay. And when women do it, it's like, you know, memoir, you know what I mean? Like there's this complete disrespect that's given to women writers when they write about their experiences and thoughts in the same way. They're sort of treated as these hysterical creatures and that they are nothing but biography, and you know what I mean? And in some of these articles, I would get cited as an exception. I would say like, well, this doesn't seem to happen to her as much, you know? So I didn't realize that I had this bias inside myself. And I remember that because when I was, you know, we find biases inside ourselves all the time. I remember when I was reading Middlemarch and I was probably 19. And I remember meeting Middlemarch, and what went through my head was like the most like unfeminist thought in the world, which was, I didn't know a woman could be this smart. That went through my head, right? I had no idea until that thought went through my head that I had a filter that said, you know, that was teaching me things that I didn't know it was teaching me. So it was kind of like that. So I was writing and I realized like there's something I'm holding back from. There's something I'm trying to like not do at the syntax level, at the, you know, and I realized I'm like, oh, I'm trying to hold on to male privilege. I'm trying to hold on to, you know, that sort of intellectual cred and mystique. And I'm afraid of what happens if I get perceived as, you know, if I get put in this other category. And so the way I think about it now, of course, then my immediate response was, well, that's what do I have to do then, right? Like, you know, I was just kind of like, okay, let's go, let's trash it, you know, and the book changed, I think, at that point, where I just really said, okay, maybe I'm going to lose all my male readers. Zazen has almost completely female characters. There's almost no men in Zazen. There's one. This character has one. This novel has one small side characters. Zazen has that toughness and it has that male mystique, you know what I mean? Like, whereas this doesn't. Remains to be seen. I do notice that when it comes up on searches, or that when it comes up, it is much more like women's fiction. I've seen it, sisters fiction, women's fiction, domestic fiction. That made me really happy. And a variety of other things. And I was like, this is going to be really interesting. And the way I interpret this is someday we ought to be able to write a book about humans. I've certainly read plenty of books where men were the 90% of the meaningful characters. And I did not think of it as male fiction. Someday we'll get to the point where, you know, that's not a barrier. But for me right now, I just kind of feel like, well, okay, guys, let's see if you're there. You know, like, are you there yet? It's a good test. So I don't know what it's going to be. I have to fight my own sort of discomfort with that, you know, and I'm going, okay, does this only mean things to women? Does the American project and history and the unraveling of these things and money and work, is it really only a female or, you know, female identified, you know, literary space just because it happens to have, but I don't know. So
this
I don't know how do I get men to read it? I'm just going to have to say that's their job, not mine, you know. So
I think you admitting that you had these qualms about, oh no, is my style getting feminized here? That's particularly, you know, welcoming of vulnerability. And so I don't think you're too stuck in the, you know, tough gonzo male journalist vibe there. If you can admit that you had these worries, you know.
Yeah, not proud of them, but
yeah. You know, I try not to think about who my readers are. I just try and think a lot about what might be going on in the head of my ideal reader. So I imagine the reader is kind of one smart, you know, ageless, gender neutral person reading my book. And I think a lot about what they know or guess or are interested in at each point. You know, I played those sort of mind games, like there's a couple of hints for them, but I don't want it to be too clear. But I want to intrigue them about that. And will they still remember that bit? How far back was it? So I think a lot about the kind of moment by moment reader response, but very little about the readers demographically. But it could just be that I've accepted most of my readers are women, you know, especially with the, you know, lesbian writer thing, that gets you an extra batch of women readers. And women read more, women are the majority of fiction readers anyway.
That's
you know,
true.
So I guess I try not to worry about it. But it is, no, it's an interesting question. And then you can bring readers from one book to the next sometimes. So, you know, you may get, if men were reading Zazen, they may read this one because your name is the same. So
I got to know the gender breakdown with Zazen was funny because, or the typing is that the two groups of people that read it would have hated each other. Like I got to see, it was like guys who were into it were like alcoholic men who really liked Fight Club and Don DeLillo and high school or college. And, you know, they were in the sort of 25 to 40 range and slightly disillusioned. That was like, and one side. And then like the women were incredible. They were very, very nerdy, but like brilliant kind of librarian types or readers in that way. Or they were like mad as hatters. They were fire worshipers. They like would give me like things for, yeah. But it was great. Like they were, and I would try to imagine them in a room together. And it wasn't going to happen. So
I have to say that since email, you know, readers can reach you much more easily because very few of them in the old days bothered to post the letter, you know, to the publisher, which might eventually get to you.
Yes,
like,
no.
Strangely enough, I only get, you know, handwritten letters now from high schoolers who've been made to do it as a class project, you know, so I get 10 of them from the same particular, you know, Illinois high school, all handwritten. But mostly people email you, and I love the immediacy of that. Like they might be just halfway through the book or something, and they're not always the people you might have been picturing for the book. You know, I'll get some, you know, 70-year-old man saying he really enjoyed the childbirth scenes in The Pull Up the Stars, and I'm like, well, wouldn't have targeted you in any Facebook targeted ads, you know? So right. I love the randomness of that. You can never quite know who your novel will reach. And luckily with novel, there's a bit of time. You know, the performance arts, like a play or even a film might seem more lasting, but it's only in cinemas for a short amount of time. You know, with performance arts, my experience is you'll always get a friend of yours saying, oh, I must go see your show. And you're like, too late, you know? Whereas novels, okay, they might have a shorter shelf life than they used to, but at least the actual novel hangs around for a while and can be found in some way, you know?
That is different because having been a musician for years and years, it was like always that like, oh, I was going to come to your show. Tell me about the next one. I'm like, you know, but you get that with novels in the sense of, you know, if something happens in the publishing that knocks it out or something goes awry or, you know, they're like, oh, just, you know, well, maybe your next one will be. I was like, yeah, I'll call you in 4, 5, 10 years. I mean, whatever your cycle is, you know, thanks. So,
however, you know, if you produce novels more slowly than every year or two, I always think it makes you look really deep, you know, like the Donna Tartt factor, the Salinger factor, you know. Write one book and then go live in the desert for 20 years and everyone will just think you are the most mysterious intellectual.
I'm going to do that. I think that's...
Whereas, you know, I pump them out so fast. I'm like the Irish mother, you know, here's another one. You know? So they can look shallow. And I sometimes feel like saying, you know, I worked really hard on it. It just happened fast, you know.
That's great. No, I love your, you have such great, you know, humility and interest and curiosity, and your balance between the sort of shocked and forensic, and it's lovely. I love it. I love your work. How are we? Did we answer everything? Are we good and clear on the questions, or do we have any other ones I missed? Because last night I did an event, I realized that like I don't know that we got to all the questions because I enjoyed the conversation so much, and I don't know that it was.
Yeah, I think that's let me see.
Caught up? Oh.
Yeah, it looks like we got another one.
Okay, I'm reading this. Guilty is human that struggled as life itself. Can you speak to the issue of holding anger and love in equal measure when writing? Okay, so that's my mom. So, okay. What I would say about that is that, yeah, I mean, I had a friend who read this book and had a big part in this book. She was reading it alongside when I was writing it. And her name is Kirsten. I put her name in as a sort of, homage to her. She's also a fisherwoman in Alaska, and, helped me with pictures and images and, things like that. And is a wonderful person and read many times. And one of the things she said to me is, she said, I really loved Zazen. I really loved it. She said, but the weird thing about this book is it's darker than Zazen. Like when you look at what happens, worse stuff happens, like more things, bad things. Like when you actually list, like, here's all the things that happens, it sounds like it's gonna, he said, but she said, it feels so much lighter. And she said, it's all the love in it. And it's just like, that was one of the things that I think was really true is, part of the project of this book was, I asked myself in the very beginning, what can't I write about? What am I bad at writing about? What am I afraid to do? And I was like, I don't know how to write about love. I don't know how to write about it in a way that I can stomach it. And, you know what I mean? And so this question for me wasn't, I'm going to write about love. It was like, I will not like shy away from it if it comes up. I won't just like. And I think that had to do with that question of feminizing and fear of vulnerabilities in the language and all sorts of things. As a result, what I found is you can get much darker. You can get much more intense in some ways because there's something else there that leavens it. And it doesn't answer it. It doesn't, it's not like, so there are things that happen that are very dark and very angry and take space in this book. But there's also just the connections between the characters. And that's where I started to understand that connection between characters. And so that tenderness, I think where I have found in my writing, I can get to it is, if I'm writing something, fiction or nonfiction, and I feel like I have to have the answer to this, or how do I have the right, I think right now, like, you can realize all over the country, everybody's terrified of making mistakes, for reasons they should or shouldn't be. There's this kind of like, anxiety about, because we're in a moment of cultural change and nobody knows where it's going to land. And so there's a lot of anxiety about like, what if I make a mistake? How does it feel to make a mistake? What if I can't please everybody? What if there's like, people can't agree, And what I've learned to do over the years is I find the thing that I'm most confused about, the thing that I might have the most sort of like really complicated feelings about, and I just go as close to that conflict as I can. And so I try to be really open about where I can't decide, where I don't know, that sort of moral ambiguity in that spot. And so I think that holding so I would say that the question that you're asking about characters, I've answered, but when you look at it in the context of the book, which is essentially, does the American project work in some ways? The question about America, about exceptionalism, about like all of these other things that are in there, then for me, it's rage, and it's also love and tenderness and confusion and conflict. So I don't know, I guess it's just sidling up to the point that is the thing that you're most afraid of, or that the thing that hurts to the touch is maybe a better way to say it. I don't know if I answered that. Do you have early writers such as a writing group? No. Or do you write alone? I write alone in a cave. Well, show it to people for fun. I have friends who like to read my work, and it is not a critical thing. Like, it's not like I give it to them and they give me feedback. It's more like, hey, you know, I sort of always have this thing I say to people, and they're like, oh, you're a writer, you know, can I read something? You know, it's like, sure. And when I give them a section, I'll say, I'm not looking for feedback. Enjoy it, don't enjoy it, hate it, don't hate it. I will never ask you about it again. And so that's how so I'll give my work to people like that. And it becomes a kind of silent brother and sisterhood of friends who are reading along with me. And it makes me feel less alone in it. When I get to the much later stages, you know, I do gut checks with friends. Like a writer, you know, and I might say, like, I really need you to read, like, I'm really feeling lost. But even then, usually it's because, like, not because I'm asking them to tell me what's not working, but because I'm asking for a sanity check. Like, I think this is fine, and, you know, or I think it's not, you know, or I just got this kind of reaction, and you know, so it's, and then you know, my agent, Sarah, is really remarkable editor. And so she wasn't with me for a lot of this process. And then in the last year and a half, I may be mixing the timelines a little bit, but maybe 2 years. She was I was having trouble. I was not a big fan of agents. I've said this in a lot of ways. It's sometimes held against me. She was, I was interviewing a lot of different people, and they were reading this manuscript, and they were all interested in the parts of it I was less interested in. And she was and they were all like really big, talented people. She was the first one who like actually came in and was like, this is the part of the story, and this is what I see it as, and this is where, you know, and it was like, she was the first person who wanted to do what I did. So I'm very biased in how I interact. I believe very strongly that it's helpful to have a sort of belligerent defense of your own instinct, because there are plenty of things that will try to like kill that. And it's easier to fix stuff later if you've defended it all the way along than it is if you lose it in the center and you try to just moderate it and rediscover it throughout. So I guess that's early readers. Yeah, I think I answered that.
Oh, thank you so much, Vanessa. This has been really lovely, and thank you, Emma. You've both been very generous with us all tonight.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
And thanks, Booksmith. You guys sound completely indefatigable. I can't imagine how many events you've done, and yet you seem enthusiastic for every one of them.
Oh, thanks, Emma. I happen to love readings and author conversations more than anything, so it's a fortunate job to have. So thank you both, and thank you all for being here with us tonight. I'll share the link for the Great Offshore Grounds one more time in the chat and in the comments. Order from Booksmith, and you can support Emma and Vanessa and us all at once. I think that's it. I hope we can all meet in person in the nearest.
I would love that. I want to see people.
Really.
Maybe when the paperback comes out. But
yeah.
I could be lovely and buy books, so that's, you know.
Send us a line. Hopefully we'll be hosting in-person events by then.
Yeah.
But until then, of course, please be safe and take care, everyone. And
yeah.
Good night, all. Thanks so much for including me, Vanessa. This was great.
Emma, it's so great to have you. Thank you so much. You're such a charming host. I love it. Okay, so before you and I nerd out on 18th century lit, we should just part. So
bye-bye. Bye all.
Bye, everyone. Have a great night.